Hey everyone, and welcome to the video. In this video I'm going to be showing you how I painted up my Saturnine Dreadnought, and every single hint, tip and technique that you do learn in this video can also be applied to any of your miniature painting projects, even the weathering techniques or the colours. I'm sure you can get something out of this video, so stay tuned, make sure you hit that like button if you do enjoy it, and most of all, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. So I will say in this video there is some airbrushing, but for all you people that do not have an airbrush, don't remember going over some alternative colour schemes or ways that you can also achieve similar results. Now I'm going to start off with priming everything black, so just grab your favourite black primer and prime up your miniature. And when it comes to these bigger units or these larger dreadnoughts, I do recommend doing everything in sub-assembly. So for this, I kept the body and the torso together, and all I had separate were the arms and his shoulder pauldrons. So to start with, I'm going to address those metallics first of all, because there's got a lot of metal on this miniature, even though, you know, there's a lot of things with colour. All those little nitty-gritty places that you struggle to get to once you've painted your main armour, it's going to be a nightmare and you'll run the risk of catching some other painted work. So we're going to address those metallics first of all. So what I've done is loaded up some Vallejo metal colour gunmetal. It's from their metal series. They're designed for airbrushing and they're quite thin and they go through. But alternatively, at this stage, even if you want to prime up this miniature and cut out a step, you could do it in something like lead belcher, or just even base coat everything out in lead belcher. So we're going to be messing around when it comes to the metallics with dark and bright silver. So basically all you need is a dark silver metallic and a bright silver metallic. And that's the thing with these metallics, as you'll see a little bit later on in the video, we are going to shift the tone and add some washes and everything like that to them. So it's all going to shift the tone. So basically, as long as you've got a dark metallic and a bright metallic, you're good to go. And I've just used an airbrush for speed. Now we can move on to the main colour of the armour, which is obviously the green, and you'll see that I have masked off some of those silver metallic areas due to not wanting to get some overspray. You will inevitably get some parts where you have to go back in and manually touch up with a brush, but again, for speed, I'm using this airbrush. Now, if you don't want to use an airbrush or you don't own an airbrush, then check out a video that I did recently, or if you've been thinking about getting into airbrushing and you want a cheap, affordable option where everything comes in one kit, then go over and check out that video. A link for that will be in the description below, and it is super affordable for everything that you get inside. And there's also a 10% discount code below there as well. But if you don't want to use an airbrush, I do recommend going over to the Artist Opus and learning that stippling dry brushing technique. You'll have seen me do it in a lot of my videos, so it's just adapting those colours and using it on your Dreadnought. Alternatively, if you've got a different colour scheme in mind for yours, whether you're doing Ultramarines or Blood Angels, anything like that, at this stage you can just switch out the colours and use your favourite colours, or depending on what faction that you're painting. So the colours that I've used to get the salamander green, I don't like the typical bright neon-y colour that theirs is associated with, so I've altered mine slightly a little bit. So I'm going to start off with caliban green first of all, and this is going to act as my main base coat layer. Then after that, I'm going to get the Army Painter's Goblin green. There will be colour match alternatives to all the colours that you see in this video, so just feel free if you've got one that matches those, because a lot of ranges do have colour matches, then use that. Now, rather than get the moot green, which will give us that saturated neon-y green, I'm going to just add a tiny little bit of ice yellow to that goblin green. And then I'm going to come in really tight with my airbrush and just hit those highlight points. So we've got caliban green on first of all, and this is just an all-over base coat. Then I'm going to load up the goblin green and just hit some of the highlight points and just make sure that, you know, you've got some of that dark of the caliban green left in the shadows. And there's a final spot highlight. I'm going to come in there, add a little bit of ice yellow to that goblin green, and then hit the brightest points for this miniature. And that is pretty much the Salamanders scheme finished. If you do want to go back in and add some additional shadows with the caliban green, feel free to do that as well, just in case you've gone overboard a little bit with the spray. However, if you want to get a little bit fancier like I've done and play around with temperature shifts, what I've done, rather than use the caliban green to go back in and reinforce some shadows, I've actually pulled out the Citadel's incubi darkness and reinforce those shadows, but what it's going to do is shift them more into a cold tone. You'll see a little bit later on how I shift that back into a warm tone as well. So you've got the nice shifts going around the miniature from the cold temperature shift to the warmer temperature shift, but we'll get into that a little bit later on in the video. Now the masking putty that I've used is just masking putty, and this will just help, and it's just really quick. It's a little bit like blue tack as well. It's just a little bit more malleable and easier to move about, and this will just prevent some of that overspray. But if you do get any overspray, get your original silver colour and go in there and just touch up any points that you need. Moving on now to those massive Saturnine shoulder pauldrons, and we're going to go with that classic lava chip like crackle theme that these tend to have on the shoulder pauldrons. I don't imagine this to be an actual physical lava. I think it's something that the Salamanders would have painted on themselves. So first of all, we need to build up that lava base, and to do this, starting from the bottom of the shoulder pauldrons upwards, I'm going to start to fade up a warmish red colour, leaving the top. I know we've got a little bit of silver on there, but we're going to paint that black a little bit later, so it's going to fade off towards the top. Once I've put that red on, I'm going to grab some white and do it more in like a speckle or a spotting, and I'm just going to go in there and just add some little random spots, making sure that they're feathering out just randomly around that red area. And then you can come in with contrast paints. So what I've done then is got the Imperial Fist yellow and sprayed it over, and because it's a translucent contrast paint, that white is going to show back through. And if you just need to feather everything in or shift that colour a little bit, feel free to go back in with your red or even something like a contrast paint that's orange, just to shift and move about a little bit of that lava-ish temperature. Now when it comes to actually doing the little black marks on top, it's easier to do it this way so that you've got the lava underneath. I had to go in and manually paint these in with black. Now I know that some people sell these stencils, and I was looking all over for one. I couldn't quite find one to come in time, so I didn't use that. But you can get some ones that are like a cracked stencil effect, and all I'd do in that case is just layer it over the top and spray it on top. But unfortunately for this one, I did have to go in manually and paint them, which does give you a little bit more control, but it does take that little bit more time. And then finally, to finish everything off, I'm going to come back in with some black paint, and I'm just going to feather that top edge in so that everything fades and blends nicely together. And then with that black, what you've got out as well, you can move on to the back of the shoulder pauldron, and all I do then for a highlight is just add a tiny little bit of white, or if you've got a grey line about, then you'd stipple on or spray some some grey onto that shoulder pauldron. Now if you don't want to do this scheme, you just want like a fancy salamander shoulder pauldron, if you don't want to do that fire effect, just follow along what I've done at the back with the black and the grey, and then if you want to put some decals on or anything like that and follow the rest of the scheme, you can do that. I just wanted to challenge myself a bit and see what I could do with these shoulder pauldrons. Now moving on from this, obviously we've got all the trim to paint and everything like that. There isn't much gold trim on this, and the one on the actual armour itself, on the main unit, I just manually painted them in, and you can manually paint these shoulder pauldrons as well. But what I've done just to speed time up a little bit is that I've used some liquid mask. And now what this is, when you get it out the bottle, it's like a liquid, and when you apply it really thick onto the areas that you don't want to get the paint on, it dries really clear, and then also after that you can spray over the top of it, which will protect the paintwork underneath what you've done. And then I just go in there with some, for the trim that I've used and for all the gold accent areas, all I've used for them is some Pro Acryl Bronze. It's my favourite colour for golds or brass or bronze. It's just a really nice warm tone colour, and then I've sprayed it over onto all the trim just to make the things a little bit quicker for me. And then with that liquid mask, you can just peel it straight off, revealing that nice peel porn, as people like to call it, underneath, and all your paintwork is protected. Now the only reason I've done it that way, you can do it manually. Again, I'm just doing all this for time, but feel free to spend as much time if you want to paint yours in manually. These are just some little tips that you might find useful for a different project. Moving on back now to the metallics, and this is going to be the final part with the metallics, so we're not going to touch them after this, just in case they need a touch-up. You can do that a little bit later on in time. Now, we've got that base coat on of the gunmetal first of all, so that's all we've applied to this miniature at this point for the metallics. But what I'm going to do, I don't like using nun oil and stuff like that. I just don't think it's contrasty enough, or it works really well for this. And I want to get some oil staining around this miniature. So what I've done, I've got some of the contrast paint rattling grime, and I've thinned this with water 50-50, so that you've got 50-50 mix of the contrast paint and water. And this will just allow it to flow into the recesses a little bit more like a wash. But what you get with that as well is you get that nice little bit of subtle staining from the actual how contrast paints work, and it'll add to like the oily stain, but then it dries a little bit more on the matte side, which then tints and like it just gives the metallics a really nice look. Once you've completed that, just give everything a dry brush now of the bright silver. I think I used rung fang steel, and I just gave everything a very light dry brush of rung fang steel. Now moving on from this, which is going to be something that we do with the metallics and also the miniature itself, and I call it pre-shading. Now what this is, it's just loading up some actual washes or some really thin inks into our airbrush and coming in really tightly. So when I'm doing it on the metallic areas, in fact I used Agrax Earthshade for this, and I've just thinned it slightly with a little bit of thinner so it's flowing nice through that airbrush. And what I'm going to do first of all is come around those metallics, and any areas where I want to see a little bit of corrosion or add a little bit of rust, or even just shift it into that warmer temperature, which I spoke about a little bit later. I'm just going to spray that onto the metallics. Now it's totally up to you. You can do the spraying first, then come on to the chipping, or you can just do the chipping and then come to the spraying, because we're going to be using both on this miniature. So I'm going to add, after that, I'm going to use a little bit of chipping to this armor. Now you really want to take your time with this, and for me it's one of the more enjoyable parts of miniature painting, adding all these little chips. You just get into a little zone, stick a podcast on or whatever it is that you like to listen to, and then get cracked on. So first of all, we're just going to use some sponge chipping with rhinox hide, and the reason I like to use sponge chipping is because I can get smaller marks than what I get with, you know, like a brush. My brush control's not fully there just yet, but I'll just work my way around the miniature, especially the lower half is where I want a lot of the chips, and with this being heresy and a bit more grimdark, and this is, I want it really battle worn, like it's been through fields and the wars consistently. So especially around the bottom half, that's where I'm going to be paying most attention to. And as I work my way up towards the top, I'm just going to be a little bit more, not as adding too many of the chips themselves to the top half, but just hitting areas which would naturally be prone to wear and tear, such as like if any parts are clunking or near the arms. These are points where you want to be adding those chips. Now, even though the sponge chipping looks great on its own, I do like to come in and refine them with a little bit of brushwork. So I'm just going to come in almost like edge highlighting, but with the actual brushwork itself, and I'm just going in there adding some additional scratches, making some bigger, and then we can move on to refining them even more and making them look a little bit more 3D. And to do that, all I've done is gone back to my Goblin green and just added some additional taps and scratches to this miniature all the way around it, just to ensure that we're getting, it almost gives it like a 3D effect where the light's hitting it. And so just make sure that any under scratches or larger chips, I'm adding these initial lighter tones of that Goblin green. And this is where I returned back to the Agrax Earthshade pre-shading, and I'm going to come and attack some of that armor now. Now, any deep recesses you can hit with this pre-shading, because what it's going to do with the Agrax Earthshade, like I said, we've got that cold temperature on, and I'm going to use an alternative warmer temperature now to add some of that grime build-up and dust. Now, this pre-shading, you might want to skip this stage. You can just go in and manually paint them with a brush if you do desire, or wait to the actual weathering steps and you'll see how I get the streaks and stuff, because it does really involve an airbrush for this stage. But what I'm doing, I've lowered my PSI right down to about 15 PSI just for more control, and I've got a 0.2 needle and nozzle in this brush. This is the Harder and Steenbeck Evolution. I've got a review coming very soon for the Galeri Mobius 0.2. And I think, you know, this is a brush if you're interested in this pre-shading, because it does have a wide application what you can achieve with your miniatures. And I'm just going around, so some of the larger chips, I'm just spraying them to give it that more corroded rustic look, as though the rust has started to form around some of those chips. And then sometimes I'll even grab some and do some streaks in and around the model. Now this part is just what I like to call pre-shading. If you want to skip over this, you can just move straight on to the weathering steps. Really quickly, before we get into the weathering part and the final touches of this video, I just wanted to quickly come on and remind you that I do have affiliate links in the description below. So if you want to head down there and get all the paints and materials that you've seen in this video, then head over to the link on Element Games, and I just get a little bit of a kickback from that, and it's the best way that you can support me and this channel. There are some other ways that you can support me. I do have links to like buy me a coffee and all that sort of good stuff. And don't forget, I also make exclusive videos over at the Grimdark Compendium, both on their site where I have some courses, and also on their YouTube where they have a plethora of Grimdark color recipes and amazing techniques, so be sure to be checking them out as well. Also in the description below are some links to some other products that you can get at a discount, so be sure to check them out. And finally, most of all, the best way you can thank me is to like this video and make sure you are a subscriber and hit that bell notification to be notified when any of my videos upload. With that said, let's jump into the weathering portion. So the first stage of weathering that we're going to apply to this miniature is an all-over unifying wash using a mix of villainy, goons, grime, and their new phase 2 decrepit filth. Both of these are equally amazing in their own right, and the reason I've chose to use both and even mix the colours sometimes is, one, I want that goons grime in just as like an element of weathering, like it's some dust and grime that's built up around the miniature, and the decrepit filth is just a darker version of that to get some varying colour in that grime, but also because it's got that decrepit filth that which is darker on its own, it's going to like deepen up some of those recesses that we might have missed, and overall it's just going to add some of that like weathering look what enamels tend to give you on your miniatures. Now I'm applying this in a 1-to-1 mix, so whatever colour I've mixed, I'm going to add the same amount of mineral spirits to it. I'm just applying it with a very large old brush. Now these are enamels, and if you've never used them, you do need mineral spirits or white spirits to be able to manipulate them. But what I'm doing is just coating it all over the miniature, just let it flow everywhere, and then get a hairdryer or just leave it to dry for around 15 to 20 minutes, or hit it with a blow dryer to speed it up. And then the beauty of enamels is we can come in and take them straight back off. So I've used a mix of sponges or Q-tips, and if you want to come in there and use your brush and refine them, you can do that as well. Now I know I've spoke a lot about oils and enamels and stuff on this channel, and if you do want to learn more about the villainy range and how to manipulate the enamels, then check out the reductive video technique that they did over on their channel. Moving on now, once all that has dried and you'll be left with this grimdarky, awful weathered miniature that looks tied into its environment, is I've been recently playing with these weathering pencils from AK, and they also sell metallic ones which are perfect for doing some chipping, or just where the chips have gone right down to the bare metal, and they're so easy because they're a point. It's actually a lot more control than an actual brush. So I'm just coming in there onto some of the edges and some of the chips and just manually scratching, adding some additional scratches, or just giving it that look where it's gone right down to the metal. Now because it's a pencil, it has a different sort of look to paint, which overall just gives the miniature a lot more interest and like contrast and different surface finishes from the rest of the actual things, from the oils or the enamels or anything like that. It just gives everything that little bit more interest to look at. But just work your way around, adding some little additional scratches and chips to your miniature, and then we can move on to the oils. So moving on now to oil paints, and I'm just going to spend this time talking a little bit about oils and giving you some hints and tips around them, because I'm using a lot of different techniques here with the oils. Now the beauty of oils is you can use them in a number of different ways, and they have a ton of playtime with them. So because they've got such a long drying time, that allows us to play about, manipulate them, blend them, buff them, and there's all different ways that we can apply them, such as oil dot filtering or even thin them down into washers. And that's all I've done here. On my palette, I've loaded up some abtelung 502 rust tones and the abtelung 502's dust for some parts of the miniature where I want some lighter streaks of dust. And really, I'm just using these and just playing, I'm just having so much fun with them. So I'm dabbing it onto areas and just then getting a clean dry brush and buffing them out and blending them to filter some of the metallics and then turn some into some rust streaks on the actual paintwork itself. Or even if I just want to add a little bit more corrosion, I can do that as well at the same time. Now, I'm not going to seal these in or anything like that. I'm just going to let them dry, and over time, and after around 24 hours they'll have fully cured. But I'm just coming in and just using, on some parts I might use oil dot filtering and then blend them out into streaks. Others I might do a more controlled application, or some areas I might even thin it down and just let it flow into the recesses. But I'd highly recommend, I know oils can be scary, but they add a ton of variation to your miniature, and now that I've added them to like the metallic areas, and you can see it's broken them up and given parts of the metallics like they've been repaired, or just a little bit more visual interest where it's broken up and everything's not just the same colour. But I can't stress enough how fun and easy oils are, especially if you're wanting like smooth blends on capes and stuff. They're just a ton of fun and they're so forgiving and so easy. So I'd highly recommend looking into oil paints and start using them in your painting projects. And then we're going to move on to actually painting the plasma glow. Now this actual tutorial, this part of the video, you can actually use any single colour following this. You've just got to change the actual colour itself. So first of all, I've loaded up some white paint into my airbrush, and I'm just actually applying this and building it up onto the coils, making sure the strongest point is right in the centre. Some people like it coming out from the corners, and you can do that if you want, but I want mine to be from the centre point. And I'm just working my way around first of all with this white, getting it nice and bright, making it look like it's just glowing in white first of all. And then to get the actual glow effect or the colour effect, this is where you can choose whichever colour you want. Now I've gone for one of these special effects from Army Painter, which I think is Plasma Glow, and this is just a nice warm tone that contrasts really nice with the work that we've just done. If you want to do it in a blue, I'd recommend picking up like their blue version of it, or just like a really bright like neon-y colour, or you can even do this with contrast paints. And then I just come in with my airbrush with that colour and apply it over the top of that white. Because these are translucent, most of them tend to be a little bit more translucent than other paints, that white will show through, and because we've faded it and made it brighter in the middle, it'll feather off towards the edges, giving us that glow effect. Now one additional final thing that you can add to it, just to really make it pop, because it does look good on its own, but you can make it pop even more. I'm just going to come back in with the white and just spray those center points. And this is a really good tip, you know, you're painting whatever glow effects on your miniatures, you've just got to change that initial color. So you've got a white base, your color, and then a tiny little bit of white finally in the center or wherever you want your glow point to be. There are other ways that you can manipulate these. I did think about dry brushing some black over the coils, and just to make it real like it's more like a heat glow effect rather than a plasma effect. But in the end I just settled for this, just to give you and demonstrate what can be done with those translucent paints. And that pretty much brings us to the end of this tutorial. Now I know it's been a bit of a long one and there might be a lot of steps in here, you might look at it and think, oh god, I don't want to do all these. But my aim, and I've hopefully been able to give you some hints, tips and techniques, ways to apply things, just little things that we can add to our paints just to tweak them a little bit and get a different effect. And it's just all about a different approach and thinking differently. And you might go away from this video and not want to paint exactly like this, but there might be parts of this video that you'll like to cherry pick some of the techniques out and just use them in your miniature painting. Now as always with some of my videos, and I'll only announce them if I'm doing this, I always like to do a giveaway. So if you do want to win this miniature, then all you have to do is be a subscriber, like the video and share it to one of your social media sites. And then in the comment section below, let me know when you've done that. But I'd like to know, what technique will you be taking out of this video? What, you know, has it inspired you? Let me know in the comment sections which parts of this video or techniques you will be using. Again, you don't have to just watch this and think, oh, I can only paint salamanders like this using these techniques. All the techniques that I've taught in this video can be applied to any painting project, whether, like I said, it doesn't matter which faction it is, or if you paint fantasy or anything along those lines, you can take what you've learned here and apply it to those projects. And with that said, I'm Nate the Feral Painter, and thanks again for spending your time here with me in this video. Make sure you do hit that like button and all that sort of good stuff, and I will catch you in my next video.